So today we're going to talk about how to complete the steps required to close a case in Trails. So obviously the first step would be to get into your workload and pick the case that you are wanting to close out. So for the purpose of today's microburst video, I'm just going to pick the Briars case. So I bring that into highlight and then I click show, which is over here, to bring the Briars case into our view. And you can feel free to maximize the screen by clicking on the button up here. So there's actually two steps that you need to do in order to close a case in Trails. One is to close all client involvement in a Trails case, and secondly, we just do our closure summary. So the first step is to go into the Client tab, and you're actually going to have to complete these steps for each of the 5 family members, or however many family members in your case. So let's just, for this video, say I want to close Janessa out. So I have her highlighted, and I'm going to click on Show. And then this shows that we have Janessa Briars in view. And what I want to do next is click on General Info, which is the first tab on the secondary toolbar. So I click on General Information, and the fields that need to be completed, the first one is the end date. So that's the end date that you want Trails to list as your end date for working with this family, the end date of the case involvement. The second is to click on Ending Residence, and you have a bunch of options over here on this drop-down box. And so you would just pick essentially where is Janessa living at the time that you are closing out the case. So there's a whole pick list here, and you would just pick whichever one is appropriate. In this case, I'm going to put parents, and that brings it into view. And I actually need to type something in for the end date, so I'll just put today's date, June 14th, 2017. Then you want to list the reason for end date. Again, there's a drop box right here, and you just pick whichever one is most appropriate. So there again are lots of options. By going down the arrow here, you can click on whichever one is the most appropriate for your case closure. So as you can see, there's lots of options, and in this case, I'm going to say services were successful on Janessa and her family. And then you're just going to want to repeat that, for each of the 5 clients in the Briars family. So I'm going to click on Change to save my work. And it says I cannot end date client involvement due to an open removal and service. So that's helpful. Anytime we forget to do a step, Trails always comes to our rescue and lets us know we are not ready to close out this case. So in this instance, it looks like there's some sort of service or removal that has not been ended, so we're unable to complete this step until we actually close out the service or end the removal. So at least we know how to do that once we go back and we end that removal. Which brings up a good point. When we are closing a case, we want to make sure everything has been completed before we do these final steps. So just know you would need to complete the steps that we just discussed for each of the 5 family members. I'm actually going to go back. I'm not going to save my changes, although in real life I would. And I'm going to go to this first button on the secondary toolbar when you're in a case, which should be looking very familiar because you've spent lots of time in all of these different tabs. But the summary button is actually where we put our closure summary. So in the fundamentals, you learn about all of what is necessary to include in a closure summary so that it is a nice end of point summary of what has happened with the family, so that if we go back to work with them in the future, we have a nice closure summary to go back to, so that, for example, in Red Team, if this family returns to our attention, we don't have to read every single piece of the case. We just have to come to this closure summary. Now, I do want to make a couple of points actually. The first is you'll want to check with your county to see if you are the person who will be actually entering this information into the closure summary or ending out the clients like we just went through. In some counties, they'll actually have you fill out a form to send to, for example, a department specialist or an administrative assistant who will actually do all the work so that they can make sure all those services or removals are closed out before officially closing out the case like we got on that error button. So check out with your county what the steps are in terms of, are you allowed to actually enter this into Trails, or are you just going to provide the information necessary to fill out that client general info tab in order to close the client's involvement in Trails case, and are you going to just provide the information for the closure summary? So once all that is done, depending upon if you'll be entering this or someone else at your county, essentially all you're going to do is click on Close Case. Your supervisor will then go through and check everything in the case to make sure it is up to date. And the last point that I wanted to make is to make sure that you have gone through all of the different tabs in the secondary toolbar to ensure that it's the most up to date. So for example, collateral information, that's where we list the different collaterals involved in the case. You want to make sure that you have all of the most up-to-date information, phone numbers, etc., as well as all of your contact notes, and that you've closed out your family services plan, etc., so that if your case gets pulled for audit, you'll be in good shape. So that's it for this video.